that, and therefore it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Shahida, because she's going to be talking about her parents' journey from Bangladesh to Cambridge, which a few people did, and many more people did after her parents came. And these are all very important stories, and it's important that it's important the stories are told, and it's important for everyone to realize that these are Cambridge stories, and they are part of Cambridge history, which is absolutely brilliant. So Mill Road History is very pleased that Shahida is starting with us. And I should say, although perhaps people know, and I'm sure Shahida will mention it, it is actually this year, not there yet, in December, it's the 50th anniversary of the formation of the state of Bangladesh. So this is very appropriate. And so I will pass you over to Shahida, and any questions store up, and we'll have a good old conversation at the end. Thank you very much. Okay. Shahida, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much, Lucy, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to talk about my parents' story. Now, this is the first time that I've actually giving a presentation about their story. I haven't spoken about their history, but I feel that it's really important that this kind of history is remembered, is recorded, because when our parents pass away, my father passed away many years ago now, but my mother is still alive, and I still speak to her about her story. And I think it's really important for us to record that, because once she's gone, the stories are gone. So I think it's really, really important for me to record our family history. So as Lucy said, I'm Shahida. I was born and raised in Cambridge with my siblings. And as you can see in the first slide, I've got two pictures here. So one of these, the slide on the left is Fensagoing, which is where my parents came from. And you can see the bridge is very similar to the Cambridge Bridge, the bridge of size, as you can see there. So I just wanted to put those two together to show you the slight similarities of them. I'm going to begin by telling you, if you'd like to go to the next slide, Simon, thank you. So this is a photo of LASCAR SEAMEN. Now, I'm going to just briefly touch on this. So Lucy's just showed you my novel I wrote about LASCARs. Now, they were the first Asian settlers in England, and a lot of people tend to think that there was an influx of Asians that came from East Pakistan, West Pakistan, and India in the 1960s and 70s, where in fact, there are many men who actually traveled to England well over 350 years ago. And these men were known as LASCARs, and they worked on British steamships. And the reason why they decided to work on these ships was because they were promised a good life. They wanted to earn money, and it was an opportunity for them to visit rich foreign lands. And many of them, when they arrived in England, they jumped ship and they escaped. They didn't want to go back to India because it was a 4-month journey on ships, which was quite distressing and quite difficult. And many married English women and settled here. So the message of a good life, visiting rich foreign lands, that carried on through the decades. So this is the reason why many men decided to come over in the 60s and 70s with civil unrest, with poverty. They wanted to have a better life. And that was the reason why my father decided to travel from East Pakistan. So it was East Pakistan during those days, and that was formed in 1955. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Simon, please. So here's a map of East Pakistan, just to give you an idea where it was, because a lot of people don't know that it was East Pakistan until 1971. So it actually became independent on the 26th of March, 1971. And then there was a 9-month war to gain independence from West Pakistan. And then Bangladesh was liberated on the 16th of December, 1971. And I was actually born on the 14th of December, 1971. So it was 2 days before the independence. And at that time, a lot of people did remember my birth because I was a twin as well, my twin sister and I. So we were sort of always remembered that we were born at that time. So it's quite significant in our family history. Would you like to go to the next slide? So here's an image of my parents' house in Bangladesh, and they came from Fensagonj, which is the north of Bangladesh. It's in Sylhet. And I just wanted to show you this picture really. This is the house that he built in 1967. So this is where he came from. But by that time, he'd already been in the UK for 10 years. So my father first arrived in Cambridge in September 1957. So I'm just going to give you a brief snapshot of my parents' story, because I could go on all night talking about what they did, but we've only got a very short time. So I just thought, let me just give you the key points in their life. So I just like the audience, everyone watching here, just to participate in what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you a question, and please type your answer in the chat. But I want you to tell me, what do you think was happening in 1957 in the UK? I'm just going to give you just a moment just for you to type in the chat. No Googling allowed. I'm sure you're all going to head to Google anyway.
Just, can you tell us the date again you were asking?
1957.
Oh, right.
So what do you think was happening in the UK at the time, in England? Okay, so shall we go to, there's quite interesting answers coming through here. So can we go to the next slide, Simon? I'm just going to give you just 3 things that are quite prominent in the time in the UK. What was, someone said they were being born. That's interesting. So there were three key things that I wanted to point out really. The Asian flu, this was a pandemic in 1957. I don't know if any of you out there who might have been around at the time who remember this. And it was the H2N2 virus, and it was quite a worrying time in 1957. And I just wanted to show you that poster. This was the poster that was circulating in England for people to understand what it was. Some of you already commented, Harold Macmillan, he was the Prime Minister in the UK at the time. He was a Conservative Prime Minister. His grandfather founded Macmillan Publishers. They were book publishers. And the last poster on the slide is a poster of a very famous film. It was The Bridge of the River Kwai. I don't know if everyone's seen that one, but that was quite prominent in the 50s. And I just wanted to just sort of give you an idea, what was happening at that time. And then we had people coming over from South Asia to settle in England. Okay, so thank you for your contributions for that. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I just wanted to show you 2 signs really. Mill Road is where my father arrived, and his first home was on Willis Road, and it was actually number 19. And Mill Road's always been known as a community of communities, and this is a place where most East Pakistanis who actually came at that time settled. So there was a very, very small community on Mill Road at the time. And then my father moved to Devonshire Road, number 6, in about 1971. So we actually found the date because we explored the electoral registers. So my father was listed in Willis Road in 1969, but we don't know exactly when he might have bought that house at the time. And then it was Devonshire Road in about 1971. So it was really nice to see his name on those electoral registers, which I managed to get copies of. I think, as with Mill Road, I'm sure everyone will agree it's the most diverse road in Cambridge. and we've got so many communities living on there. And I'm just proud to say that, you know, we were part of that. We grew up in that area. Okay, so we'd like to go to the next slide, Simon. Thank you. So this is my father's first portrait, and it was dated about 1962. And this is the only earliest photo that we actually have of him. And the studio where he had this photo taken was Ramsey and Mosprat, and that was based at Post Office Terrace in Cambridge. And they were very famous for taking portraits. They took photos of very famous people at the time. And we've also discovered that these negatives have been handed over to the Cambridge collections. And I think last year they spent, they got together about 50,000 negatives, and I think they've reached the letter J. And we're hoping this year they will continue that. I think the pandemic has really held things back. But what I'm trying to do is gain more negatives to see if there are any more pictures of my father. And I'm pretty sure there are. And I think that'll be an exciting find if we do find anything, because we only just have one photo. But if you're going to have studio photos taken at the time, I'm sure the photographer would have taken quite a few photos. So I'm just really hoping that we find some more photos of him. So when my father first arrived, he lived in a bedsit, so we're not sure exactly where. And then he worked in a kitchen at a restaurant, so that was how he first started to work. So to be honest, we don't know very much about his early years. My mother wasn't there at the time, but it's from stories from what other people have told us, because my father, he had arrived at a time where there was probably a handful of other East Pakistani settlers at the time. And we know so that there was another man who had arrived in 1949, so he could have been the first. So there was a very small community where they could all sort of connect together. And I think that was very comforting for them. They were there to help and support each other. So you'd like to go to the next slide. So this was my father's first passport, and we've still got it. My mother has got them in her safe, and it's just really interesting to see that to have something like this after all those years. As I said before, East Pakistan was formed in 1955. So I'll just show you, sorry, if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is the inside of my father's passport, and this is how he looked. You know, in those days, I think Bangladeshi, well, it wasn't Bangladeshi, it was East Pakistani passports, they were handwritten. And it's just really nice to be able to see this, you know, it's part of his history that we still have. And my mother's kept it for all these years. Would you like to go to the next slide? And this is the inside as well. So it's got his details where he's come from. There's a box at the bottom that says it replaced his previous passport, and it's got the date as well. It's September 1957. And again, it's, you know, it's interesting to know whether people have still got their East Pakistani passports, those that arrived at the time. So when he arrived, it wasn't Heathrow Airport, it was London Airport. And I think a lot of people don't realise that that was the name of the airport at the time. So it was London Airport. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is my mother's passport. So this is her very first one, actually. And as you can see, it's got her name there. And she came on via her spouse, basically. So that's the visa that she got, that she was allowed to travel to England to live with my father. So we'd like to go to the next slide, please. And this is my mother's very first photo. This is the only photo we have of her at the time. It's quite unusual to see the photo being attached by two small metal rings. But the actual passport that we can see, if you sort of lift that, we can see the name of her father, my grandfather, you know, daughter of at the time. So, you know, it's quite interesting to see that. She's only 4'8", she's not very tall at all. So you can see the height on the actually written on the passport. So we rarely hear about stories from Bengali women. And I think for those that did arrive for the first time, including my mother, it was quite hard. It was very, very tough, not having family around, coming to a strange country. And my mother arrived on the 15th of January, 1964. So it was right in the middle of winter. And I think the first thing that she remembers is how cold it was. I think as with anyone, wherever you travel, wherever you go, you would always talk about the weather first, but she said it was bitterly, bitterly cold. I think the coldest winter that England ever had was in 1963, but it was just very, very cold for her. And but one thing she did say is she really liked her neighbours. You know, they were English neighbours. They were very kind to her. They were interested in what she used to wear. She used to wear a sari. So I think with the neighbours, they were quite curious to see someone come from East Pakistan, a lot of curiosity. But at the time she couldn't speak any English, but she said, you know, they were very, very kind, and she always remembers that. If we go to the next slide. So this is her visa stamp. So as you can see, when it was stamped on the 6th of January, so she arrived just on the 15th. So it wasn't long after she had that stamp. So again, it says, you know, joining husband. So, you know, during those times, East Pakistani families, they had clear-cut roles for men and women. So men were the breadwinners, they went out to work, and the women were at home raising children. And when we talk about 1964, so again, I'd like you to tell me what happened in 1964. So I'd like some comments in the chat. I'm sure you'll be able to give me more details about that. So please, I'll just give you a moment if you can tell me what happened in England in 1964. I started school, that's very good. I'm just interested to know whether you remember when you started school, Julia. The Beatles.
Yeah. I said the wrong thing. I meant grammar school. I was 11. I was 11.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, I think the Beatles is the thing that everyone seems to remember most. Thank you for those comments. Can we go to the next slide? And this is exactly it. So I put down here, well, the Beatles, Beatlemania was sweeping the country, basically. And this is the year when the Beatles hit America. And I put the first £10 note was issued for the first time since the Second World War. So you can see in that picture there, Sir Alec Douglas Home was the Conservative Prime Minister, as you can see. And the car, does anyone remember this car? Is the Volkswagen Beetle, and it was a very popular car at the time. And we had the Tokyo Olympics in 1964 as well. And just to throw something interesting in there as well, Top of the Pops, it first aired on BBC TV. And BBC TV, BBC Television was named BBC One in 1964. So, you know, lots of things were happening then, but I just wanted to show you, this was happening then, and it just seemed like such a long, long time ago, but it's nice that some of you can remember that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I just wanted to show you this picture, really. So as I said before, I just talked about how cold it really was. And I think for my mother, when she said, you know, how much it used to snow. So we're all experiencing snow at the moment. We've got some snow, but nothing like the snow that fell in the 60s. It was quite bad. It really was. The snow used to come up to the front door, and my father had to shovel the snow out of the path. And winters were much, much colder back then. And regarding, you know, heating in homes, you know, when my father first moved to Willis Road, they didn't have central heating at the time. It was more coal fire. So it was difficult heating up a house properly. And my mother also said that she used to put a glass of water in the bedroom when it was really cold at night, and used to see a thin ice forming at the top because it was cold. You know, it was really, really cold. But also the summers as well. You know, it was a lot hotter, especially the summer of '76. I think everyone can remember that. So I think it's you know, as with any family coming over, it was a strange country. They miss their families back home, especially my mother missing her own mother as well. She, at the time, my mother used to write, my grandmother used to write letters to my mother, but they were written by other people, and then someone would come, well, my father would read these letters to my mother. So that was the sort of connection that they had at the time. So obviously phone calls were just not possible during that time because my grandmother used to live in a village where there were no telephones at the time. So I think having that communication was quite difficult, but it was something that obviously she missed, you know, not being able to speak to her mother at the time, all the time. But over the years that improved, but I think letters were the big form of communication at the time. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So as Lucy said before, I'm a Mill Road Maternity Hospital baby with my siblings. So we were born here. This is a photo of the Mill Road Maternity Hospital on Ditchburn Place, which is off Mill Road. And it wasn't far from my parents' home. So that was quite convenient for us to be born there. And then my parents' home was literally just down the road. So it was originally a poorhouse in 1838, which became a maternity hospital by 1948. I was just wondering, everyone who's watching here, how many of you were born at the Mill Road Hospital? So my 3 older brothers and I had a twin sister, we were all born there. But it's nice to be able to have that connection on Mill Road, that we can actually say that we were born here. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I thought I'd show you this photo. It's my photo of me and my sister, we're twins. And I think this is one of our earliest pictures, to be honest. At that time, we didn't have a lot of photos. It's more of my brothers who had more photos taken. But I just wanted to show you that this is our earliest photo, my sister and I. And I'm the one on the left, as you probably may have worked that out already. I've still got the eyes, haven't I? So I've been told. Okay, so the next slide. So this is a photo of Regent Street in 1963. And as you can see, is a photo of my father's restaurant, and it's called the New Bengal Restaurant. And it was next door to an estate agent called Watson's. So when East Pakistani men, they arrived here, that was the first sort of work that they went into. And they worked in restaurants. And I think the first Indian restaurant opened in about 1810, and that was in London. But I think the very first one in Cambridge, as far as I know, was the Kohinoor on Mill Road, and that was open in about 1943. I think it's changed its name now, but again, we've got that history, that very early history on Mill Road. So what happened was, so my father opened this restaurant in the early 60s, and then slowly he started to help bring over his cousins, and they had work ready for them at the restaurants. And this is what most men did. You know, they set up restaurants, a place of work, and there was a place for them to come and stay, and a place for them to come and work. So this picture is copyrighted to the Cambridge Collections. And again, it's 1963. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is just the front view of the restaurant. That was number 43 Regent Street. And I think it's just a few doors down from the Pizza Hut today. For a place, you know, it was a very, very busy place. And there are Facebook pages I've seen called Cambridge Memories. People have posted pictures of the restaurant, and they've also commented that they used to eat there. So it's really nice to actually, you know, read these stories that they still remember that they had meals there. So, you know, at the time, it was very difficult to get halal meat and chicken, you know, halal food. And that my father used to go down to London to get that. So he used to go to Taj stores in Brick Lane, and that was open in 1936. So I think a lot of people in the area in East Anglia used to go there because that was a place where they sold everything. So they were one of the very early shops that opened in London because there weren't any shops in Cambridge at the time. And it was very convenient to actually do it through his restaurant as well. So he used to put orders through his restaurant, and that those foods were also brought home. Okay. So can we go to the next slide, please? So again, this is another photo. This shows the direction of Hills Road. You can see that church just at the top. It's a very interesting photo because you can see that 1960s car. And I think it's just amazing to see that. There's a lady just right at the top there. And again, that's the sign, you know, you can quite clearly see, and that belongs to the Cambridgeshire collections. So at that time, when people did come over, my father brought his cousins over. My mother's place was a place to eat, to get together, to socialise. And it was a nice place for everyone just to, you know, come together, support each other. Because I think in those days it was very, very important for everyone to support each other. And it boosted morale really, because, you know, many of them did miss their families back home. Okay, can we go to the next picture, please? So this is a photo of my father in his restaurant. We think it's the New Bengal, and this was May 1973. And the reason why we know the date is there's a calendar at the back. You can see there's a lady holding some flowers, and we've sort of zoomed on that calendar and we can see it says May 1973. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known the date of that picture. So it's quite interesting to see. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so this is my eldest brother on Willis Road, and I wanted to just show you that picture because you can see that corner of Willis Road and how that looked then. So this was way before I was born, and it's just really interesting to see that part of Willis Road at the top. It's really changed now. I just wanted to show you that photo, whether just by looking at that anyone would actually realise or recognise that was Willis Road. We go to the next slide. And I wanted to show you this picture. It's not quite a clear picture, but this is Devonshire Road. So this is my three brothers when they grew up on Devonshire Road. And you can quite clearly see that is the top of Devonshire Road, and that's where my father's house was at number 6. You can see that car as well. That's a dead giveaway for 1970s car. Go to the next slide, please. And this was my father's second restaurant. So he brought one on Fitzroy Street, and it was the Bengal Tandoor Mahal restaurant. And that was opposite Eden Chapel, where Eden Chapel is today. So it's all disappeared now. So this was before the Grafton Centre was built. So this, I think, dated in the late 70s. And the Freeman Hardy Willis is a shoe shop. So that was actually there years before my father opened that restaurant. And when he did buy it, it was actually a Chinese restaurant. I think it was called Hong Kong House at the time. So that wasn't there for very long. And my father brought that. So he had 2 restaurants at the same time. But he had to give up the restaurant on Regent Street in about 1965 because, in about 1973 rather. So what happened was the estate agents next door, Watsons, they wanted the office space back because they originally had lent it to my father who had rented it out. And that went to court basically, and it was published in the Cambridge Evening News at the time. It went to Whitehall, there was a public inquiry about it. And then he had to sadly give up the Bengal restaurant on Regent Street. And I think he was, you know, very, very disappointed at the time. It was a busy place right in the centre of town. And it was one of those things where he had no control over, and the restaurant sadly closed down then. But he moved on to this one, and this was another place in the heart of the city centre, and he really enjoyed sort of meeting people. And again, you know, it's lovely to read the stories on the Facebook pages as well, where people do remember eating in the restaurant there. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we're just sort of coming to the end. So I just wanted to show you this. So when Bangladesh became, well, East Pakistan became the independent nation of Bangladesh, the flag on the left, that was the very first flag, and it had a map in the center. And the map on the right, the flag on the right rather, that is the original flag of Bangladesh today. So you can see the dark green represents a green field, and the red disc, slightly offset from the center, but it represents the sun rising over the country. And the red color, it does represent the bloodshed during the time of the war in 1971. So people do remember that, you know, this is what happened, you know, for that independence. And it was quite an anxious time for my parents because they had family there. And I think, as with any family who were living there at the time, it was a very, very anxious time. So next slide, please. So this is the final slide. And I wanted to show you this because there's a lot of people who don't know the type of items that people used to eat at the time, and they still eat them today. And you can see they're betel nuts, and you've got the leaves that people eat, and there's a betel nut cutter just on the left. And it's something that people still eat today in Asian countries. It can rot your teeth basically when you have that. It's very, very strong, it's very acidic, but people have been eating these for years. And I just wanted to show you that because a lot of people don't know what these kind of things that people used to have after their meals. And certainly myself, I don't touch the stuff, it's quite bitter, it really is. But my mother still has that today. She's lost most of her teeth, but she likes to put it in a holder, which she sort of, what's the word? She likes to blend it with, it's almost like a sort of a hammer in a large tube, which is the grains, you can sort of chop it down until it's almost like powdery form. And she has that, and she likes to have that because she can't chew it. This stuff is really sort of quite hard to have. And you can see just on the bottom right as well, this is, it's called a botti, and it's a long curved blade. And she used to use that to cut vegetables, to cut fish, to cut meat, rather than a knife. And today, you know, people still use that. And they're very sharp on both sides. And you will find that in quite a few Asian shops up and down the country. But it's something that still she uses today. And there's a lot of ladies who do use that. So I just wanted to show you that, you know, just, I don't think you've probably ever seen that before, but it's a tool that they used to use. And just on the final slide, on the next slide, please. So I've just come towards the end, and you know, do connect with me on social media. My details are there, but I just really hope that you enjoyed that. You know, there's just so much more to tell in a story, but I've just given you a quick snapshot, and I hope that you enjoyed that. And if you've got any questions, you know, please put them in the chat. And thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand it back over to Simon or Lucy. Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. Am I on mute? Hang on, I need gallery. How do I go on to gallery? Doesn't really matter.
Sorry, I was on mute. You're not on mute, Lucy.
Well, that was lovely, Shahida, and I know that people are going to have masses of questions because this is just the beginning of what you're starting to tell us, and we all want to know even more. I'm also interested in the fact that you've got material culture. I'm wondering whether we could do a little exhibition at some point.
Yes,
you know,
I think that would be good. That would be good.
Museum.
I mean, I suppose you've not seen that before.
No, no. And, you know, we could do a culinary thing, or anyway, we can talk about that. But so people put their hands up for questions, and I could see there are questions there.
We have a few in chat already, so I'll just read those out.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So Mary says, where did you go to school?
Where did I go to school? Okay, so so I was born in 1971. So in 1975, my parents moved to the Chesterton area. So I went to Milton Row Primary School, which was actually on Gilbert Road. It's been knocked down now and it's moved to Asham Road. And I also went to Chesterton. So that was the area that we grew up in. And my mother still lives there today in that area.
Okay. And talking about your mother, Cara asked, did your mum actually work in the restaurants or do anything?
No. So there was 5 of us, 5 siblings. So she was at home
Cool.
raising all of us. I think she had 5 of us in 8 years, basically. So that was her role, to raise us. And, she was quite happy doing that.
Then Angela says, what was the total size of your community during these years? I assume that means the...
Yes, I think from the late 70s onwards, the community grew. So that's when more and more people started to come. I don't know the exact figures, but when my father did come, as I said before, just a handful of East Pakistani men, and then more men decided to come over. They got married in East Pakistan, Bangladesh, and they brought their wives over. So that's when the community grew. So I think it's the late 70s and the early 80s when the community really did start to grow.
Have you got any idea what the actual numbers were around that time?
The number, oh gosh.
I know, a bit of a...
I wouldn't know that, but it's something, yes, I'll definitely look that up. I think it'll be interesting to see the census, exactly how many Asians were here at the time, but I think it's a very, very small number, probably not more than even 100. I think probably even less than that, I have to say. So, we saw the community grow, and it started off very, very small, and then it developed from there.
So did your father have any more than those 2 restaurants, or was that, that's as far as his...
So no. So my father, he passed away in 1985 in Bangladesh. He fell ill over there, and that got passed over. So the one on Fitzroy Street, as I showed you the last picture, so that was sold in the early 1990s. But in between the time that after my father passed away, we had some uncles who ran the restaurant. But he was, a very passionate businessman at the time, and in those days it was very, very hard. He worked very hard, worked very long hours. There were some days that we never used to see him when we were younger.
Did he have to actually kind of manage both the restaurants, or did he have something?
He did for a short time. I think that would have been, for 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and then, as I said, the New Bengal had to be returned to the estate agents, Watsons, and then he concentrated the rest his time on the restaurant on Fitzroy Street.
All right. Okay. So what else we got here? Helen, do you want to just ask your question because it's long?
Hi, Shahida. I was going to ask you about your memories of the War for Independence, because I was a very small child, about kindergarten age, and but living in the rival city in Oxford, and we hosted a family from Dhaka during the war. And campaigned for the father to be released from prison. So it's really one of my earliest political memories, with so much going on, and they were then writing a new constitution kind of at the kitchen table, and yes, very, very pressured time.
That's interesting. Yes, I mean, myself personally, I don't have any memories because I was born literally 2 days before.
You were yeah. But in the family, in the family memory, it was such a big moment, wasn't it? With really big worries that everything would be lost, and
indeed, and it was the fact the independence meant that they could speak their own language, Bengali. There was a lot of difference between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. But one story that I do know in Cambridge itself, that when the independence did happen the following year, the restaurant owners got together and they had parties. to celebrate, because it was, again, as you said, a huge moment. It was a time of anxiety. You know, 9-month war probably doesn't sound like a long time, but it definitely was, because I think most of the war did concentrate on Dhaka, but my parents were from Sylhet, which was the north. But, you know, there was anxiety all over the country. So it would have been lovely if my father was here today. I could have asked him more, but, you know, from what my mother's saying, that there was a lot of anxiety for family members who were there because they just didn't know what would happen to them. They didn't know what was going on 100%.
Thank you.
When I was actually in that period, I was in Greece as a nanny, and I remember the father, who's Greek and didn't speak English, thrusting a newspaper at me and saying, they've got this all wrong. Look, they've got this Pakistan here and this Pakistan here, and they've got these flames coming up and it's war and stuff. And he said, how can this be? This is ridiculous. I said, no, they are two separate, but there's India in the middle. And we had this huge row. I don't speak Greek, so it was a very strange mixture. And of course I won, because it was the one fact I knew about East and West Pakistan. And it always puzzled me. I must admit that I got so involved in looking after children and continually rowing with the father, I never actually explored it that much, but it is a very interesting period of history.
It is indeed. I think that the Bengalis who lived in East Pakistan, they were called Pakistani Bengalis at the time. So, you know, it was obviously a difficult time, but again, it was down to the language, the culture. There's a lot of difference there. And I think, if you think about it, Bangladesh is 50 years this year, and it doesn't seem like a long time, but for me, I've had to sort of research that history, try and understand that history, and also teach my own children about, you know, where my parents came from. And even on my birth certificate, it actually says that my father was born in East Pakistan. So that's you know, written on there. And you might be interested to also know, away from my parents' story, there are 2 graves buried in Cambridge at the Essential Parish Burial Ground, which is off Huntington Road. And on the gravestones actually says they were from East Pakistan. And then the only 2 graves in the whole of Cambridge that we found that actually has East Pakistan written on gravestone. That's very, very rare to find. So we're doing more research on that to try and find out about their stories and what happened to them. So hopefully we'll find out more about that. My son Ibrahim and I, we're working on the Cambridge Muslim heritage, just to find out about the stories of East Pakistanis who settled before the 1960s, because this is an area where it's lost history and a lot of people don't know about, and we want to find those lost histories, lost stories. You know, we know about the 70s, we know about the 80s, but what about pre-1960s? You know, what were these people doing? And that's something that we're sort of working on. So I'm hopefully happy to tell you about that sometime, maybe in another presentation, exactly what our findings are.
Brilliant. Okay, just a few more questions here that I think might be good. So if you're okay to carry on a few more. So it's a question: whereabouts did you worship in those days? Was there
very interesting question. In those days, I think the first mosque was set up on Chesterton Road. It was a house on 175 Chesterton Road. So my parents were living in Chesterton at the time, Gurney Way in Cambridge, which my mother still lives there today. And that was a place where we went to. We went to learn our Arabic, and there was only not more than about probably 20 of us, children-wise, and then the mosque on Mawson Road opened in 1981, if I'm correct, and that was the main mosque for the city. And then, as you all know, Cambridge Central Mosque opened in 2019. So, you know, there's a huge history there, you know, starting off in a house, then they moved to Mawson Road, and then Mawson Road is still there, it's still used. But in the very, very early days, even before I was born, my father used to have prayers in his living room with other people. You know, they all used to come together because there wasn't a place to worship and there wasn't a mosque. So it was his living room and people got together. And that's one of the stories that I heard was happening at the time.
Okay, a couple more. What were the main community facilities used by your parents' community other than restaurants or homes? Well, I guess were there any?
I think by the early 80s, there were a couple of grocery stores opening. There was one on Mill Road called Dewan's Groceries. And I think for a short time, my father may have even owned that. So we think, you know, we don't know the precise details. The owner is still living on Ross Street with his wife. And apparently they have photos. I'm hoping that they will dig them out at some point, and I'd love to see them because they have photos of my father. But that was a grocery store where they used to sell sort of Asian items, and that was a place that they used. But I think generally, you know, it was difficult. People did tend to travel to London, even Peterborough, and got most of their, you know, halal food from shops like that. So I think it was, you know, difficult in those days because there were very, very few facilities then.
I think we might have had contact with the people from Derwents actually a year or two ago. They were asking for memories and pictures. I'll have to dig out and see what we had from them.
Yes, I've heard they have lots. So I'm just hoping they have perhaps some photos of my father. That's what we're looking for at the moment. So.
Did you ever go back to Sylhet to visit family there?
Yes, we did, and you know, even to this day, people talk about my father. So when we did go back a few years ago, people come from afar, you know, just to come and see us because they remember my father who had travelled there many years ago. You know, to hear the stories, you know, it's very fascinating for them. So my father's buried in Bangladesh, but for him to have that history here, you know, a piece of him is here, despite him being buried in Bangladesh. And it's nice to be able to, you know, continue telling his story as being, you know, one of the early East Pakistani settlers in Cambridge.
So why was it that he actually left to come to Cambridge in the first place? Was it to find work?
Yes, I think I explained just earlier, for a better life. My father had one brother. They were orphaned at a very young age. They had quite a difficult childhood. And as with any person at that time, looking for a better life, looking for better opportunities. And East Pakistan was going through a time of poverty as well. There was a cyclone in 1970, which really devastated the country at the time. So it was for a better life, and he worked for that. He worked very, very hard. And in those days, they worked extremely hard. And it was something that they believed that they had to work for, and they were very hardworking. And I think a lot of people tend to forget that, you know, it just didn't happen just suddenly for them. They worked at it for many, many years just to make their lives a success, just for their families as well.
Okay, so probably the last one, I think, now, and then we can let you go because you probably.
It's all right.
This one's from Lucy. It was about how did your mother manage when she came over? Because presumably she didn't speak English. She didn't know anyone other than her husband.
Yes, so to be honest, she didn't manage to learn a lot of English. I think through the later years when my sister and I, we used to read storybooks with her, and I still remember this. She used to read them with us, and I think she learnt some words like that. But you know, it was difficult because she was spending a lot of time at home, you know, raising us, and I think it's very undervalued, you know, being a housewife and raising children. But it is a huge job in itself, and it's a very difficult job, you know, to raise good children, and that was the role at the time of many women who did come here. Whereas today, in this day and age, you know, women are working, they have a balance of life and home life and work life. But in those days, as I said before, the man was the breadwinner of the family, and he would provide for his family and raise the children, as the mother would raise the children.
In the 1980s, there was an initiative set up at St Matthew's School where we invited the Bangladeshi, mostly Bangladeshi. It was any parents really, but it was mostly Bangladeshi women who didn't have any English, and we were teaching them or just having a mum's group really where they could sit and talk. And it got me off lessons for a whole hour. So
Really? Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I think that's, you know, when more and more Bangladeshi women started to arrive. But
Yeah.
yes, I think it's, you know, I think with my mother, she still talks about the early days, as with any person her age. She's 82 now. We know there's another Bangladeshi lady who's a little bit older than her by probably about 2 years. She used to live on Kingston Street, just opposite Devonshire Road. I think she still lives there today.
was that Bibi's mum?
I think so, yes, yes. So she's a little bit older than my mother, but my mum talks about her because they used to go to each other's houses, and they used to have that connection. But, you know, it's just amazing that, you know, she's still there, still going strong.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions. And I can see just one comment that Cambridge Central Mosque is on Sky Arts this evening. You're absolutely right about that. So I'm sure you can go back and look at that later.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for all your questions and for being here tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It does raise such huge questions, and you've given us a lovely introduction to the whole subject area.
I just want to say one last thing before we all sign off. I think, as with anyone who has a different background, or a different heritage, you know, please record the early stories, because they'll be very valuable one day for future generations to come. So I think it's really important that we record as much as possible.
Yeah, doing that now. Could you give me your father's name that I might look for in the photos?
Yes, yes. Do you want me to put it in the chat?
Or just spell it out for me.
Okay, it's Abdul, so Abdul.
Yeah.
And it's Karim, Karim. And that was my maiden name before I got married as well.
Okay, I'll have a look in the Palmer Clark collection and have a look and see if I find that name anywhere.
Oh, wonderful. That'd be absolutely fascinating.
I've just
thank you so much.
Got your email.
You have? Okay, wonderful. That'd be really interesting. No, thank you. I think someone else, just one last question. What was the name of that photo studio again? It was at Ramsey and Muspratt. I can type that in the chat if that helps.
Yeah, Ramsey and Muspratt, the photo, but the I've got the whole database that was done by the Cambridge Family History Society. So it's just that it never got finished. But
oh, I see. Yeah, because I'm looking for more photos of my father. I really am. We've only just got that one, but there must be more. So it'd be.
I'll have a look and I'll email you if I find anything.
Oh, wonderful. That'd be lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Shahida, I once did an hour's interview with Zahara Chowdhury on Mill Road, and she came over at about the same time as your mum, I think, from Sylhet, I seem to remember.
Yes.
And it was very painful for her as well. Very painful, I think.
Yes, yes. I think they took more of the pain than the best times, because it was painful.
And they were so young when they came.
Young and isolated, I have to say.
Young and isolated.
Yes. But it was an experience, even though they were isolated. But yes, I mean, it was a difficult time. It was a very, very difficult time for these women. And
they're still here. So
they are, yes.
That's kind of tribute. So they did manage to shape a life for themselves.
Yes, 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 indeed.
Okay.
Okay, right. Thank you, Shahida. And we'd love to have you back another time. When you've worked up some more material, come back to us,
yes,
please.
I'd love to. Thank you.
I'll just flag up that in March, we're not going to do our usual talk, but at the end of March, we're going to be part of the Cambridge Festival doing a tribute to Alan. It's called An Evening with Alan Brigham, and everybody's welcome, and Simon will send out details on that. April, we're going to do a workshop on using archives, including digital stuff, I think. That might be interesting, Shahida, for stuff coming up for you. And then we have our AGM in May, and Helen is going to give us a talk about her research with a local community in Sturton Town area, and the various things they come up with, basic sort of focus on the 19th century, I think. Lots of interesting social history then. So that's May the 11th, I think it is. Look forward to that. If everybody's enjoyed this evening, we always welcome a small donation. Go to our website if you fancy it. And that's how we keep going and do a few publications and this and that. So thank you very much. And thank you particularly, Shahida. That was lovely.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Shahida. Good night.
Thank you, Shahida. That was brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nothing down.
Bye.